Hello, I'm Raj Chengappa from India Today and your host for Nothing But the Truth. Every week, we will deal with a key issue and bring you perspectives and clarity as to why this issue is important to you and the one clear truth that emerges from it. In this episode, I'm going to deal with a unique and remarkable political personality. But before I mention his name, let us look at India. It is a federal structure. And very important for its economic growth and development is that the state has to flourish. If the state doesn't flourish, the country doesn't flourish. Since 2003, India Today magazine, the publication that I work for, has been recording and assessing the performance of states across the country, called the State of the States. More recently, we have focused and honed in on individual states and looked at the performance across key development parameters. And one of the states that we looked at recently is Odisha. And this is the state that I'm going to talk to because the personality is Naveen Patnaik, the Chief Minister of Odisha. Naveen Patnaik is in his 5th consecutive term as Chief Minister. And in all these 22 years that he's been the Chief Minister and head of Odisha, he has brought a unique brand of politics. And why do I say so? Firstly, Naveen Patnaik, unlike most other politicians, doesn't believe in verbosity. We know that politicians love to make speeches. Naveen Patnaik doesn't believe in speeches. In fact, in the many interviews that I've had with him, whenever I asked him, what is the true mantra of success? He says, when my work speaks for itself, then let it. His dictum is speak less, act more, and let your performance talk loudly about what you have done. He demonstrated that dictum more recently when in 2019, during the assembly polls for Odisha, which was simultaneously held with the Lok Sabha polls in the state, Naveen Patnaik, in all his election speeches, just used one sentence. He would ask the audience in Odia, and I'm not sure if my pronunciation is right, but he would say, Apano kushi tho, which means, are you happy? The crowd would roar back and say that they are happy. And Naveen Patnaik would stop there and end his speech and leave. The fact that the crowd believed in him was demonstrated in the results of the elections. Not only was Naveen Patnaik elected for the 5th time as Chief Minister, his party, the Biju Janata Dal, won a landslide majority. And in the Lok Sabha, Odisha Lok Sabha seats, he cornered most of the Lok Sabha seats despite the fact that the BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party, with the immense popularity of Narendra Modi at his head, campaigned in that state, and yet he got the better of them. There are other factors that make Naveen Patnaik unique. He is simplicity personified. He has a complete Gandhian approach towards what he does. Despite the fact that he has a huge mansion that was gifted by his father, he believes in living in the outhouse of his father's house. He drives a car without a red beacon, and he wears a simple kurta white pajama in white, which is, he doesn't change at all wherever he goes. The most interesting thing about him is that this was not the Naveen Patnaik that one knew when he was young. His father, Biju Patnaik, was a former Chief Minister of Odisha, and when he died in 1997, no one expected Naveen Patnaik to take over his mantle. Because Naveen Patnaik was living the jet-set life at that time. He mingled with the rich and famous. He opened a boutique shop in the Oberoi Hotel in Delhi called Psyche Delhi. And among his clientele was the Beatles. He wrote books, and one of the editors of his books is Jacqueline Onassis, the wife of the famous US President John F. Kennedy. And they did 2 books together, and one of them dealt with the herbal gardens of India. But when his father died, almost overnight, Naveen Patnaik changed his entire avatar. He gave up the high life. He shunned his friends, particularly the elite ones. He shifted to Odisha and lived like a hermit. He then contested elections in coalition with the BJP and won in 2000. His party won, along with the BJP, a majority, and he became Chief Minister of Odisha in the year 2000. By 2009, he severed his connections from the BJP and in his third term was able to win independently. But we're getting ahead of the story. Let's come back to the reasons why Naveen Patnaik is such a success as a chief minister and what is the model of management that he propagates. Let's take a look at Odisha itself. It was, when Naveen Patnaik took over as chief minister, one of the poorest states in the country. In fact, it was clubbed along with the other states which were called Bimaru, which stood for Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan and Uttar Pradesh, that were as poor as Odisha was. Now, when Naveen Patnaik took over, the poverty levels in Odisha was over 50%. Rice production was so low that the state had to go with a begging bowl to other states, including Haryana and Punjab, to get rice from them. Naveen Patnaik first focused on agriculture. He transformed the farming community in Odisha with his various programs. Today, Odisha is not only one of the leading producers of rice, it also exports rice to other states. Apart from the farmers, Naveen Patnaik focused on women. Now, what he did was that he formed self-help groups and funded them. That empowered women. And along with it, he created leadership, which meant that in all the panchayat posts, he had a certain reservation for women, and they came to the fore. The other aspect was that Odisha is known for its tribals. It's dominated in large sections in various parts that were there. He also focused on their welfare. One of the major problems that Odisha had was that it was always beset with natural calamities, particularly cyclones. Naveen Patnaik laid down the rules as to how cyclones should be dealt with. They used to cause enormous loss of life. What he did was he brought a management style that planned much in advance. Early warning systems were installed. People were evacuated. Those places where they would be evacuated were known much in advance. There was medical treatment. There was food available that was there. Immediately, disaster teams rushed to that place, and the loss of life in major cyclones were almost nil. So much so that the model that Naveen Patnaik has developed for Odisha has now become a model that the world over, not just Indian states, but even disaster relief managements the world over have begun to follow and look at. He demonstrated that more recently during the COVID pandemic. Now, he was among the first movers of the chief minister that said that this is a serious disease that is causing death and major problems for people, and he decided that ICU treatment, intensive care unit treatment, would be free for everybody, irrespective of their salaries, their positions in government, whatever it was, the poor, the rich, everybody would get ICU treatment free. And he coordinated, the government coordinated with the private hospitals to ensure that this was a reality. Apart from that, Odisha is an oxygen supply and oxygen producer. And what he did was, when he realized that the rest of the country was suffering from a lack of oxygen, if you recall Delhi, Mumbai, everybody had problems, he ensured that the excess supply of oxygen that his state had was moved by tankers to the rest of the country. And for that act itself, we should applaud and thank Naveen Patnaik and the state of Odisha for it. Not only did he deal with the health issues of the state, he made sure that in other areas that Odisha is known for, whether it is in tourism, whether it's a religious center, whether the Odisha culture, none of these were neglected. If you go to Puri now, you will see it transformed into a major pilgrim center. It is the first city that has 24/7 water supply. And if you look at another aspect, which is sports, we all know how well the Indian team did in the Olympic hockey performance that was there recently. And a large part, you could say, came from the fact of the focus that Naveen Patnaik brought to hockey. He built world-class facilities, state of the art. I've seen it personally. I was called once during those matches. And you could see he brought the best teams in the world. He held the World Cup hockey over here. That brought across awareness that is there. And today, Bhubaneswar is considered the hockey capital of India. And it would not be an exaggeration to say that even of the world too. Naveen Patnaik and his government has also contributed to the industrial development of the state. And in doing so, he has increased the state's financial resources and used that to bring employment as well as development, his various development plans that he's funded. Odisha is one of the most mineral-rich states in the country. And Naveen Patnaik and his government developed that. And today, in terms of value of production, Odisha is the largest contributor to the Indian exchequer when it comes to mineral produce. It is the steel capital of India, producing the largest amount of steel and stainless steel in the country. Along with it, the most important thing was that economic growth of Odisha is not only higher than the national average, it has grown impressively in the last 5 years, including during the pandemic years. It has recovered remarkably. And if you take the average growth rate in these last 5 years, it is an average of 10.85%. This is highly creditable. There are many achievements that I could list, but I would like to stop here and focus on what makes Naveen Patnaik so successful, both electorally and as well as in terms of development and meeting the needs of the citizen of his state. I would call this the Naveen Patnaik model of management, and I'll explain what are the principles that he has followed that makes him so successful and what others could learn from him. Firstly, Naveen Patnaik has adopted what is called a purpose-driven style of management. In this, there is a vision, there is a purpose that is fixed, and the whole idea is to give, to enable people, to empower them, and give them, make a difference to their lives. Naveen Patnaik has done this by inspiring his ministerial colleagues, his bureaucracy, and also the entire government machinery to head towards a particular purpose, and his single-minded focus is the development of the state and the welfare of the state. And he has kept this like that. To enable the success of this purpose-driven philosophy of management, Naveen Patnaik has adopted what he calls the 5 T's of management. And I'll begin with the first T, which is transparency. Very important that you ensure that the people know what you're doing, why you're spending what you're doing. It's an open government. People can question and ask him, and that also reduces corruption. The second is teamwork. Without teamwork, whether you get the bureaucracy to work, whether you get your cabinet colleagues to work, whether you get people to cooperate with you, teamwork is critical. The third aspect is technology. Without technology, particularly in, we're all used to smartphones and everything and e-governance, this is what Naveen Patnaik has brought. A very modern run e-government that he's doing that enables people to use technology to further development. And then the most critical thing that he emphasizes on is timeliness. Every project has to be executed on time. He is very particular about that. So these are the 4 T's, and he says that would lead to the 5th T, which is the transformation of the state because of these 4 T's that you've employed, and he has done that highly successfully. The second factor, or the second management style of his, is simplicity. I had mentioned earlier he lives like a hermit. He ensures that he has no trappings of luxury that he had earlier, living in his outhouse. He, by his own personal example, shows and shuns anything to do with opulence. He is one with the people when he goes around, that's there. And most important is that in his style of functioning, he is very clear that there is zero tolerance for corruption, and he believes in efficiency. And what he does, which comes to the third point of management, is that he monitors personally whatever development works go on. And earlier, he used to actually attend the review meetings before the pandemic, where I have sat through in some of his meetings, where he sits with the officers. And wherever the development work there, he actually adds value. One of the things I remember when I was sitting in one of his programs, he said, do we pay wages to pregnant women? And do we give them leave? Because that is one of the major things when you look at construction workers, for instance. You will see a lot of them go through pregnancy, and then they have to, when they deliver, they don't get money. He made sure during that period, I remember, that this factor was taken care of. I'm just giving you one example of the kind of micro details he gets into. The other thing he does is, ever since the pandemic has come, his mobility has been restricted, but his office, the Chief Minister's office, actually monitors this, whatever programs he does, almost on a daily or a weekly basis. And one of the officers was telling me that when you are a collector or a district collector of a state or district magistrate, depending which state you are in, there would be a phone call from the Chief Minister's office in case the program was not going well to ask, why isn't this happening? Now, if there are 2 phone calls or 3 phone calls and the reply is not satisfactory, Naveen Patnaik has that officer removed and puts someone else there so that the process goes on. And that brings real efficiency to people because they understand that they are constantly being monitored. Fourthly, Naveen Patnaik is a bachelor and has no dynastic predilections or an heir apparent. His party, the Biju Janata Dal, there is an accusation that it is personality driven, that is centered around Naveen Patnaik, and after him, who? Naveen Patnaik says that this is a misnomer, this is false, because what he has done in all these years is that he's built a second and third tier of leadership, and he says that when it is necessary, he will not nominate, they will decide who should be the next chief minister. He's 75 years old and he is confident that even after his departure from the scene for whatever reason, if he wants to leave the post, his legacy or the party's legacy will stay on and the BJD will continue to rule Odisha. Naveen Patnaik has also been, despite the air that he has, he's a canny politician. Anyone who has challenged him and has questioned his authority or leveled charges against him, he's been ruthless in terms of dealing with them. Many people have tried to challenge him and take over his leadership, but in all these years, he's ensured that his entire, in terms of personality and in terms of this thing, he remains untouched against any corruption charges. He has emerged victorious in any of the internal political battles that's there. And that's because, not just that he's ruthless, but because of the work that he does, the performance that he does, and his personality. That's what makes the difference. Fifth and finally, Naveen Patnaik, if you look at why he's become unbeatable, is that he's done several things. The first part is that in the first decade of his rule, he brought hope and change. That's what kept him going. If you look at the second decade, the most important thing that he established was faith and trust. People believed in him. They believed that he would deliver. They believed that he was only concerned about the welfare of the state. They trusted him. And that faith and trust is what gets politicians elected over and over again above all issues of anti-incumbency. So much so that Naveen Patnaik, if he completes his term this time, the 5th term by 2024, he would become the longest serving chief minister of the country, overtaking Pawan Chambling of Sikkim and the late Jyoti Basu of West Bengal. For me, Naveen Patnaik is the true karma yogi of Indian politics. And the country needs a lot more leaders like him. Thank you for listening to this episode, and I look forward to seeing you next week.